Welcome to the Mental Insights podcast. This is your host, Brennan Catuli, and I'm here today for episode number 10 with Donna Liddle. Donna is a transformational life coach and a clinical hypnotherapist, and she has 20 plus years in the mental health field, and she has a lot to share about her own experiences within organization viewpoint within mental health, and as well having her own business working with clients one-on-one. So we'll have a lot to speak about with Donna, but if you want to just give a brief introduction more of what you do within your organization work and within your personal business, that would be great.
Hi, so as Brendan says, I am a transformational life coach and clinical hypnotherapist, and I've had my own business for about 10 years dealing with all kinds of issues. So people just generally wanting to change their lives, to make things better, and that can be around like body issues, around weight loss, things like that. But a lot of it is around them wanting to live the best possible life for themselves. So people who feel really motivated to change their lives because they've kind of hit the bottom and they want to come back up and want to have the very best life that they possibly can. So a lot of that's around sort of mindset, confidence, self-worth, really kind of, I suppose, that process of growing themselves and personal development. And as I said before, sort of all of that kind of positive mindset stuff. As you said, Brendan, I have worked in mental health for the last 20 years for an independent mental health charity. And within that, my role has mainly been around coordinating various different counselling services. So there's like a rapid response suicide prevention counselling service, which is dealing with clients who have suicidal ideation or who have made an attempt. And that's about getting them from a place of hopelessness to hope, so that they feel that they can move forward with their lives and make the changes that they need, as well as sort of various different counselling services that we have, which whole host of mental health issues, from depression, anxiety, bereavement, PTSD, so many different areas, abuse. Anything and everything is kind of what we always say in terms of the kind of the client group that we deal with. So as I said, my role has mainly been within that kind of coordinating the different services, assessing clients' suitability for the service, as well as obviously doing coaching and hypnotherapy within that role as well. So there's just been so much and kind of such a vast array of clients that we've dealt with, from sort of professionals, people from different sort of forces, fire brigade, police, social workers, GPs, surgeons, everybody down to the local kind of supermarket worker. It's everybody and anybody. Mental health sadly does not discriminate. It doesn't matter whether you have all of the money in the world or no money in the world. It affects everybody. So that's kind of my background and the stuff that I've done over the years.
Wonderful. Thank you, Donna. And I think it's so important that you're spearheading such an important project and such an important field, because the World Health Organization came out with a study that 800,000 people commit suicide a year. So staggering number for what we're seeing today. And it's definitely something that we need to take control over and face head on. And it's incredible that you've been in that field for so long. And I think it really shows how devoted you are to create that change. And as we're going to speak more about how you got into this field and more about what you really do, for my own instance, what brought me into the mental health field was because I had personal experience with it. And it seems like that's what a lot happens within this field with a lot of people that I've been connecting with. And, I was young, and when I heard of what a mental illness was, I always thought that was so extreme. But then when you take it down it's everybody and anybody. You see that it's not only the person that's sitting right next to you on the train, it's also the three other people that are across from you in the supermarket. It's every single place that you can imagine, and it's something that communicating and sharing the awareness and speaking up about whether you're going through it or someone else is the first step. It's the first priority that we can make it known that we're all going through these issues. And I think
Yeah.
that's why I've enjoyed doing this thus far. So as I've spoken a little bit about how I did, when I was a teenager, I was facing some dark challenges, some trauma, and I think that opened my eyes to see that I faced issues and I want to help others go through that. So why don't you speak about how you came into the mental health field and what kind of made you passionate about wanting to serve others?
Yeah, so for me, similarly to you, I would say that I suffered from probably not realizing that's what it was at the time, but from probably about 12, 13, that I started to feel really, really depressed and low. A lot of self-esteem issues. I experienced a lot of bullying throughout school from probably about the age of 9 or 10. And that continued pretty much till I was about 15. Parents divorced when I was about 9 as well. So kind of all of those issues as you're growing up and finding yourself and not really knowing where I fitted. I think that was probably the biggest thing. I always felt like I had lots of acquaintances, but very few close friends. And you just, I don't know, I think some people go through that phase where they don't quite know where they fit with a group of people. So I think for me, that kind of was the start of it at that age, but I kind of found that I dipped in and out of it. I would probably was okay from about 14 to 18. And then when I went to college, started to feel really depressed again, totally isolating myself, I would go from like one extreme to the other, so isolating yourself from friends or then constantly going out drinking with friends and things like that. So anything to just escape. And it was probably then when I was at college that I got involved with the charity that I now work for. They used to have a young people's group. I was encouraged by my mother to go along to that group for support, and then ended up volunteering with them. And eventually, I think within about a year of volunteering, a job came up and I was offered that role. And that was just generally like helping out with bits of admin and things like that, which for me, like looking back now, that was not the direction my life was going in. I did media at college, wanted to do tour and stage management with bands and things like that. And then now I couldn't imagine doing anything different. Because you see the difference it makes. Like you see clients come in for those initial assessments and how low they are, usually how they don't see a way forward, to them going out so confident and like more of a lust for life, wanting to live the life rather than, like I say, that kind of place they came in where it was really just such a darkness that they didn't know how to get through that. So I think over the years, my passion has just grown stronger and stronger. We always have this issue at work where you just keep wanting to offer more. Clients come with different issues and we want to be the answer for that. And sadly, obviously, you can't do everything, but we do try. And I think that was what led me into doing my stuff with the coaching side of things and the hypnotherapy, was that I just really wanted to help people to find that, I suppose, inner happiness, that kind of place, because we look externally all the time, and it's still something that I know I work through myself quite often, is that you get into this thing where we look for validation and our worth around us externally from other people or from the things that we do, rather than getting it from inside. So a lot of the stuff that I do with clients is around them understanding that for themselves, that actually it comes from within, and we have to kind of build a really strong foundation within ourselves.
That's great. And yeah, I think it's great that you provide the self-worth aspect of it, because for me that was the biggest step, where I did know when I was younger that I wanted to provide service to others through some sort of opportunity, whether it's, just volunteering or so forth. But I didn't really love or care or felt comfortable within my body or myself. So I didn't even see past my own wall. And I think that was ended up being the first step for me of, I need to face my problems, my fears, my issues. And then once I'm comfortable enough within myself, you can make that drastic change towards other people, because you know how you helped yourself. And once you know those kind of steps and those workarounds, then you can try to implement it within the people around you and with people that you're either serving, or if you're in an organization like yourself. So I think that's so important to help provide that. So why don't you speak about, from your as you do the transformational life coaching, how do you help someone really bring up those self beliefs and those focusing on self love and learning to become more comfortable within yourself?
So the first thing that I would be doing is looking at addressing their self-talk. A lot of the time we make ourselves feel worse without realizing that we're doing it. It's become very normal and natural in like the way that we talk about ourselves to other people, in saying, oh, I'm not very good at this, I can't do this. And we just reinforce all of those negatives. And so that kind of internal dialogue that you have with yourself, a lot of the time when I talk about with clients, they are constantly telling themselves negative after negative after negative, and really pulling themselves apart. And and whether or not that's kind of started from within themselves, or whether it's things they've heard other people saying. So as we're growing up, we're often told by other people, even down to like simple things like, oh, you don't like that, or you wouldn't like this, or you don't do this. And so we take all of that on and sort of store it, and then repeatedly tell ourselves. So the first and kind of biggest foundation point for me is that mindset, and that self-talk is about encouraging them to use things like affirmations. So repeating positive statements to themselves. We would establish kind of what the main sort of topics are that are the biggest issues that they want to work through, and find out. So if somebody was like really struggling with how, you talked about kind of your body and things like that. So if they tell, weight loss was a very typical one, if they're constantly telling themselves they are fat, they can't lose weight, it's kind of reinforcing all of that. So it doesn't matter what they do externally to change that internal dialogue that's going on is telling them the complete opposite. And the way that your brain works is it will keep proving you right. So no good at diets, I always give up on them. You will. Doesn't matter what you do, you will still keep doing that. So it's helping them to develop a new way of thinking and gaining control over the way that they talk to themselves, as well as helping their mindset work for them. So very much picking up on what they say, because it becomes so unconscious and normal that they can be like, working through it and going, oh yes, and they're developing those things. And then the next sentence they say is something really negative about themselves, which totally negates everything that's gone before. So that's something that has to be repeated. It's not just one of those like, oh, you do it once and it's all right. I would reinforce that with the hypnotherapy stuff that we do. So it's very bespoke to the language that they use, so that when I do any kind of script, it has in the language that they use and the affirmations that they want to set in their mind. So we would work on that, and they would go away between sessions and continue to build on that. So any way in which we can just keep catching it. So I tell them to do things like, catch the thoughts that you're having, notice when you're telling yourself certain things, interrupt it, stop yourself from doing it, say something different. So there's kind of, like I say, a lot of ego strengthening and foundation building, so that they start to really believe it and take that on, and really catch themselves when they know they're in that real negative place.
That's great. And I love that it's the continuing process of repeating, because it's definitely so important to continue that. And, as you see it through each day, then you become more aware of when you're having those negative thoughts, throughout your day that you don't necessarily want to think, but it's just, it's a matter of, changing the way that your mind perceives yourself. And I think it's really impactful doing that through like journaling, or even just in like a meditation session. But what I've learned is, I think it's been actually studied that if you are writing down and reading, like speaking it aloud to yourself, it's provide much more impact in the way that your brain processes that sentence and that perception of yourself. So I think it's so important that, whether you write down one of those sentences and then start speaking it to yourself, and it gains a much more value to the way that you start to interact with yourself, which is such a great first step. And I think originally when you're talking about in the beginning of how these negative thought processes like come about, I think trauma is a huge thing for someone, whether they like have faced it in their past. However many years, I think trauma really offers a lot of different ways that somebody has to overcome these issues. And a lot of times it gets built and brought down into their, brain and how they perceive that issue. So from your experience, how have you tried to tackle that issue of having someone face their trauma or something negative within their life that has caused this issue? Because I think it's so important to face your fears and try to see, all right, this is the problem at hand and this is what happened, but how can I move forward from this negative experience and try to make a positive out of it and learn and grow from it to improve your future?
Yeah, I think there are a few different ways in which to do that. One of them that I find really good is there's an exercise that I use with clients called core transformations, where you're really getting to the kind of the surface level stuff that we experience on a day-to-day basis. So whether it's something that you're saying to yourself, that kind of thing of like behaviors having sort of a positive intention, positive not necessarily being good, but that it serves us in some way. So trying to get to the underneath of that. So getting to the real core of the feeling and what that's about. And then building that back up. So when you're talking about trauma, being able to almost take the good things, when you go through that kind of transformation, taking the goodness in all of those things and building it back up. So it totally changes the way that you experience that, because you're reinforcing a lot of the positive aspects in that. It's something that recently working with a client around, so they'd had a very traumatic experience about 7 or 8 years ago, which really brought about all of those feelings of worthlessness, of they were such a horrible person, and they really kind of lost a sense of who they were, because they defined themselves by the experiences they'd had. So in that, what actually ended up happening, doing something like the core transformations, is finding out that when we kind of went deeper into it, that it actually took them back to a real childlike place where, not necessarily connected with the trauma, but where they felt like a child that was unable to have that kind of understanding and strength and love. So a lot of that was about helping that kind of inner child part of them to grow up again and kind of to keep giving it love. So reinforcing all of those strengths and feelings and almost giving that person the kind of the resources they needed to go back to that time and to grow through those, rather than we kind of repeatedly go back but don't necessarily, I think without kind of help through therapy and things like that, to have the skills and resources that you need to be able to heal that and bring that into the present day and to keep moving that forward. So, and there were like, I suppose I want to say it's kind of an encompassing thing, because then I would reinforce that again through the hypnotherapy side of things. I've given them a lot of strengthening exercises to do to really help build themselves up again, and to deal with the feelings brought about by that. And I think everybody's trauma is different, and there's lots of very good therapies out there. I myself had PTSD about 7 years ago, and I had EMDR, which I would say was one of the best things I could have ever done. And it was a matter of 3 sessions, and it really detached the emotional side of things. So I still have all of the memories, but it doesn't give that really heightened emotion. And I think that's, for me, where a lot of the real negative things seem to attach to, is that real heightened emotion, and it becomes out of control, especially like in terms of like the PTSD side of things. It would be just, you wouldn't know when it was going to happen, when something would just be triggered. And I think that's the other thing, like when we're talking about the self-talk and things like that, and you were saying about like journaling, and when you go through the day, if you start to journal, you start to be able to understand what triggers those feelings. It could be a smell, it could be a song that you hear, it could be a conversation you've had with someone. So it's about understanding actually that it's not just something that happened in here instantaneously and nothing happened. When you start to look back, you go, well, that was a trigger, and that on top of it, and you start to say, well, no wonder I was falling apart. So like I say, I think there's so many different ways that you can do that, and I think it depends on what the trauma is. And what I would definitely say is getting the right kind of therapy that would help with that, because there are so many things which, for me, especially at that time, it was having something that was healing the emotional response without having to relive the trauma. Does that make sense? Because I think often there's a lot of therapies where people feel like they're just reliving what happened, and it's sort of re-traumatizing them.
Definitely, yeah. I've heard that many people have had different, positive and negative experiences within different therapies, and I think that's why it's so important to have the initial consultation and figure out what's going to be best for you. And because there really is, there's so many therapies out there that are very unique to every person's case. Whether they're facing trauma, whether they just have like negative self-doubt. There's so many different cases that someone can face, what they need to approach within their own life. And I think this actually leads into a good conversation about just the stigma around mental health, because it's really grown substantially, and it still seems like people don't really understand and are comfortable with speaking about mental health and what people struggle with. And I think you'd have a great viewpoint on that, because you do see both sides of it. You see it from as someone who's experienced mental health issues, and you also see it from an organizational standpoint, where you really are trying to lead a huge journey in transforming a lot of people's lives. And you also have your personal business of where you're one-on-one with people. So why don't you talk about how you've experienced kind of the stigma, whether it's just even through society around, friends, or being around people throughout, your time. I think it's so important, because it's not a conversation that was brought up, like we were saying. And, for someone to want to go seek help and go seek a therapy, a lot of people don't because it's so stigmatized and they're like, I don't think I need it. So why don't you speak about kind of all the different perspectives that you've seen through how mental health is stigmatized today?
Yeah, so I think for me personally, there was definitely, I probably would have said I didn't quite understand it when I was younger. And I was actually having a conversation with somebody today about the fact that I could look back and know for definite, anyway, from things that friends have said now, that they've all experienced problems when they were younger, but we never told each other. Like now, it's okay to say, yeah, I felt depressed, I was self-harming, I was really anxious, I had OCD. It's okay to kind of say that now, but when we were kids, it wasn't okay to say that. So um, there was that side of it, if you just didn't talk about it, so then you're left feeling like you're the only person who suffers from it. So there must be something wrong with you. It's not normal. You're the only person. From the organisation's point of view, over the years, we've done lots of things trying to raise awareness, and very publicly, in one of the local supermarkets, we were handing out leaflets. And the amount of people who would walk past and go, oh, I don't have a mental health problem, or just shunned you. They didn't want to know anything about it. Even a friend's parents just wouldn't talk about it. When I used to have 2 jobs when I first started with mine volunteering, and they were like, oh, I still work in a Boots. And when I said, oh, no, I work full time at mine now, it was just like, shut down the conversation, don't want to talk about it. And that was 20 years ago, but it's sadly, to some respect, it's no different. There are still those people who don't understand it, don't want to understand it, and would never, ever believe that they have a mental health problem. So through the organisation, what we started to do was talk about emotional distress, because we said everybody experienced emotional distress. And I think, like, more and more now in this country, it's being talked about. I mean, my statistic is that it's 1 in 4 people experience mental health problems. The big difficulty is that there are still not enough services out there. So there's very much about trying to reduce the stigma attached to mental health, and about raising awareness of people experiencing mental health problems, but still not enough to actually help those who are suffering. And the statistic that you gave before about suicide, that many people should not be dying, because, like I was going to say, at their own hand, they shouldn't be at a place where they feel that low it is the only way out for them, because they don't feel like they can access support, or because they just don't know how to talk about it. And I think, again, part of the conversation I was having with one of our counsellors at work today was that there needs to be more help and support for children. Her child is experiencing issues, and she is really, really struggling, because the only service that is there to help children is not helping. It's months and months that his issues have been going on, and they're still no further forward. And I think, in fact, it'll be coming up to a year. And she's saying, like, we're still got to wait 6 weeks before this happens, and then it's another 2 weeks after that before the next step happens. Things just don't happen quickly enough. And I think that there has to be sort of a bigger approach to it, of looking at all of the different aspects. So helping at a very young age with children to learn about how to deal with their emotions, how to talk about it. And I think certainly the culture around where I live, there's still that, like, men don't really talk about the problems. That's what does women think. Women talk about the problems, men don't talk about problems. So even in that, there just isn't that kind of sharing between people as to what's going on. I'm hoping that is becoming more and more, where people do feel open. I was very impressed and surprised by a few of my friends who last year on World Mental Health Day actually shared their stories. And that's what I mean about, like, now knowing that they had those experiences, but they never told you at the time, and you kind of think, why didn't you say anything? But again, back to that thing of you think you're the only one. So there's obviously something wrong with you. You know, you're not normal, not like everybody else, just living this happy life and not realizing that actually nobody around you is living that happy life either.
Definitely. I completely agree. And it seems like it's everywhere where, you know, a couple of years later, and once people start to become more open, they'll say, "Oh, I dealt with this," or "I experienced this." And then it's, "Oh, so did I." And it's, you know, why didn't we both go out and say and try to be there? Because, you know, maybe we could have helped each other through this more efficiently. We would have been quicker to face, you know, these issues together, or it just would have provided comfort for each other to just know, like knowing that someone else experiences the same, you know, issue, problem, emotion. It's so important to go through things together. I think relationships are so important, and I think it leads to a good conversation about really what someone can do if, you know, they can't seek these services, because you're speaking about like services are not available for a lot of people, and it's not enough for how many people are struggling with these issues. And you provided a great insight to saying emotional learning for children. And one of my upcoming guests on the podcast, Brandon Burrell, actually he promotes emotional intelligence and empowerment through kids. So he works with children in younger ages, around like kindergarten through 12th grade, to try to implement emotional intelligence, emotional learning, to try to promote that. And I think that's so important, because at a youth age, it's so important to start instilling these values that people can carry on, because once they know at a younger age that it's okay to feel emotions, it's okay to feel sad, angry, you know, they can start to understand of, you know, why it's happening and what they can do. And that's what, as well, what my organization Metamorphosis tries to provide is like routines that someone can do elsewhere besides, you know, being in therapy or your medication or being in a facility. Like when services aren't provided, we need to understand and know what we can do at like an immediate time to try to, you know, help and cope with what we're going through, you know, whatever emotion we're trying to feel. So, you know, as you coach people to, you know, try to, you know, promote a positive lifestyle and implement, you know, a more positive approach to the way that they live, what are some things that you try to have them do when they, you know, go home, when they're relaxing for the day? What's something that, you know, obviously everything's not going to quick fix the emotion that they're feeling, but what are some, you know, like habits or routines or any type of lifestyle changes that you try to have them implement that can benefit their own mental health? Because, you know, when someone's severely struggling and, you know, they want to end their life or so forth, there needs to be that trigger to bring them back and say, all right, no, my life, you know, it is worth it. You know, so what are some things that you try to help your clients, and just even what you have done to try to, you know, get your mind onto a different track and just do any type of activity or so forth? What are some things that you like to promote?
So for me, one of the big things is gratitude. I think being very grateful for the things that you already have. I think when we get into that negative state of mind, we look for ways in which to validate more negativity. I suppose we start to look at all the things we don't have. You know, like, oh well, I don't have this, and I haven't got any money, I haven't got the car that I want, I haven't got the job that I want, this didn't go right, that didn't go right. Rather than starting to focus on the things that we do have. And for sometimes that can be for people just the simplest thing of like, I have a roof over my head. When I go and switch on, a light comes on. Do you know, I have heating in the house. It can be as simple as, for some people out there, they probably don't have that. They probably can't afford to put the heating on and things like that. So definitely there is a taking stock of what you do have and being truly grateful for that. Looking at writing down those gratitudes so you can keep reminding yourself of the things that you have, like when you talked about journaling before. So journaling is a fantastic way, and if you don't want to do it to write down kind of the negative things, you can use that as with clients. I often tell them to do it kind of like as a daily check-in, so they're downloading a lot of the, well, I'd say the crap, and kind of getting rid of the things that didn't go so well today. But what did go well? What made you smile today? Because there might just be, oh, well, I bumped into this total random stranger who started a conversation with us and it just made me smile, or the sun was shining. Anything to kind of start to focus on positive things that happen throughout the day. Having good routines you talked about, so having good morning routines, meditation, as well as good nighttime routines. A lot of the time, I hear clients who spend large portions of their time on social media and electronic devices, and they fill their head with what everybody else's life is so much better than theirs. And how this isn't happening for them, that isn't happening, why is it not happening for me? Look at everybody's living this fantastic Insta life and all the rest of it. And that's not real, and they don't understand it's not real. People post to say that they're having a much better life than they're having. It's not necessarily based on the whole reality of actually what day-to-day life is like. So I would be encouraging to reduce that. And especially on a night time when they're going to bed, to start to set themselves like a wind down time, because for me one of the big important things is getting enough sleep. If you were to take stock of your life, when things you kind of said about like what I would do when I'm feeling that way, I start to notice what I'm either not doing anymore that I was doing before and was working for us. So what we tend to do is stop having contact with friends. So obviously we want to be doing the opposite of that. We want to keep talking to people. Start telling people, I'm starting to feel this way, and do it early on. I used to find that I would only ever tell people that I'd been really low when I was starting to pick up. I would never tell them when I was starting to go down. And I've learned now over time to actually, although I still have that dip, is I notice it a lot sooner and I tell people that's how I feel. And part of that is not necessarily to get the help from them, but actually just it's about saying this is where I am. And I think part of that is saying that to myself, like I'm starting to feel this way, I need to do something to change it. So quite often I'm very good now that I've got a really good network of people who can say, are you doing this? Are you doing that? And give that a little bit of advice. So friends and family can be really supportive. It's good if you can build yourself a supportive network, and start to look at, are you not sleeping? Are you lying in bed all day and just like, that kind of pressing the snooze? And then when you do get up, you end up being very reactive, and it increases the level of anxiety you experience because you're usually running late for everything. You're just not ahead of the game as such. When you have a good morning routine, you get yourself in a really good place for the day. So there's a lot of kind of mental setup. Set yourself up the night before, that it doesn't matter how bad the day's been, tomorrow's a new day, and I'm going to get up tomorrow and I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. And it doesn't matter if you don't do all of the things that you say you're going to do, but just keep telling yourself that. Eventually you will continue. Affirmations, as we were talking before, and I know when you were saying about kind of that repetition, one of the things I often get clients to do and do myself is stand in front of a mirror and say those things to yourself. It really feels very different when you're actually talking directly to yourself and hearing those words being said. A lot of the time it can be quite emotional for people, that they don't realize, like, you can be telling yourself really nice things and then start crying and go, why am I crying? So there are so many things. In terms of with the rapid response clients, we use what we call a SAFE plan. So they actually have a written action plan of helpline numbers they can ring if they're really feeling low. Our office numbers, things like that. And then they have a list of things that they can do. So whether it's call a friend, it might be take the dog for a walk, it might be read a specific book, anything that they can do that they can just see at a glance when they're feeling low. And they can, I would encourage clients as well to like almost have like a toolbox of things that you can use. And if something isn't working, try something else. Don't kind of go, oh, well, I tried that and it didn't work, so nothing's going to work for us. It's like, well, that didn't work, so then I'll try this, or I'll try that, and I'll find the thing that does work for us. So I think there are so many different tools, and it is just finding what works for you and being aware that sometimes that changes as you change and grow and develop. So the thing that you used to use might not work as well, so you try something else. I'm a big one for books, as you probably see. And I think it, for me, that is it. There's just, you get a little snippet, one little thing that either somebody says or that you read in a book that just speaks volumes to you and is the key in that moment that unlocks the door. And there's a lot of stuff, as I was saying before, about that kind of self-love, self-worth, is just encouraging the fact that you are worthy. Do you know, like, you have a place in this world? And I think people, including myself, get to a place where you tell yourself everybody would be better off without you. And you can find so much information which will like back that up in your own, oh, well, because this happened and that one said this to us and nobody ever answers the phone to us and nobody did. And we just reinforce that, but actually going, do you know what do I want out of life? Where am I going? How do I want to feel, rather than being really stuck in that, how they're feeling right now. With clients, I do a lot of like timeline and future pacing, like what would it be like when you're feeling like this, and helping them to step into that to understand what that feels like. So any technique where you can just switch up. Have your favorite movie to watch. I know somebody recently has been posting about their real struggles with mental health and suicide, and they were at a point where they were ready to end it all. And actually somebody made them watch It's a Wonderful Life, and it's totally transformed how he's feeling and how, well, I suppose not necessarily how he's feeling, but certainly how he's viewing his life and how he's moving forward. So it can be anything, do you know, but it's having as much of those things around you and having them on hand at an instant. So getting a little box or something like that and putting all of those things in, like, as you know, that there's like always those first aid boxes, isn't there? Like any workplace has a first aid box, and but almost having your own kind of break glass in case of an emergency, and just having all of those things to hand to help you when you need them.
That's awesome. I really like that perspective and that analogy of the first aid. And It's a Wonderful Life actually was, that's one of my favorite movies. My uncle ended up showing me that movie, and that, just the way that I viewed myself, it was still during the time that I was going through a lot of self-development phases, and it just sparked such a different perspective of how I try to go about my life, because it's your relationships, your life is just so important. It's so worthy, and you truly do have a purpose. So it's learning what it is, which I think is great, what you were talking about, of having those, questions for yourself. And I think that's why journaling is great, because you can sit down and say, all right, what do I want to do for, this year? Or, what are my goals? What are my values? What do I want to focus on as a person? Because I think a lot of people do get caught up in their jobs and a lot of what they're doing within their life. And sure enough, it's months go by and they haven't really progressed. They haven't developed any of their relationships or even within themselves. They're doing less activity. So like people can get lost in that. And having, I think, whether it's journaling or therapy, like there's a lot of different instances where you can just think, all right, where do I want to be? What do I want to do? It's important to have those self-reflective questions to continue trying to be the best person that you can be, because you get lost in that, and then you end up just digging yourself into a lot of different places that could cause a lot of harm for yourself. So before I want to ask my last question, I just want to offer this time for you to either, you just did speak about a lot of good tips for someone, but if there's any other tips or any topic or theme that you want to speak about, or any resource that you really enjoy that you think would be great for people. So any advice or tip that you'd want to leave my audience, for anybody who's listening and may be having a tough time currently, or just needs that perspective change, or that new idea that you have.
I think for me, probably the biggest thing is that for me, I feel a lot of people have like a misalignment with, you talked about values, and we end up going through life not knowing what our purpose is. A lot of the conversations I have with people are around the fact that life didn't quite turn out how they expected. We had this kind of blueprint about what life was going to be like. I was going to be married, I was going to have 2 kids, we were going to have 3 dogs, and all of those things that they thought were going to happen, and thought they were going to happen by a certain age. They were going to be doing whatever job. And for some people, they actually got all of the things they thought they were going to have, but still thought there was going to be more. And a lot of that comes with that kind of misalignment from what they end up doing. It doesn't fit with their values. Like for instance, people who've got into high-powered, high-pressured jobs, and usually down to, not always, but they're quite often down to kind of parental expectation. Well, my parents always expected I was going to go and do this, and what they really wanted to do was something more creative. So there was very much like, that kind of certain professions that they had to fit into, but actually what they really wanted to do was just start their own business. And that's another thing. A lot of people who transition from leaving employment to starting their own business, and they're usually the ones that I've worked with have usually been in really, really well-paid jobs, and everybody around them is going, why would you leave that job? Why would you leave that income to start your own business? What if it fails? What if this? What if that? And they are truly passionate about what they want to do. And a lot of the coaching that I do is around helping people to find that kind of, that sense of purpose, to follow their passion. I am a huge believer that in whatever it is, and if it takes the shape of our hobbies and our interests rather than our careers, whatever it is, but you should follow your passion in life. And I think a lot of the time we go through that mundane thing of, well, I have to get up, I have to get a job, I have to go to work, I have to do this. And there's, again, that kind of expectations, not necessarily put on by ourselves for what we want, but society or parents, peers, anybody expecting certain things of us. And I'm very much about helping people to find what it is they're truly passionate about, and what they want in their life. And I think that helps to shift them to that place so they can find that true purpose, that thing that really ignites that fire inside them, that makes you want to get up every day and live your life, rather than that kind of opposite place we were just talking about, where you don't want to get up, you don't want to face the day life hasn't turned out how you expected, everything feels like it's going wrong, and it tends to be one thing after another. It seems to happen because we're in that mindset, so we look for things to reinforce that. So I think one of the biggest things is what we were talking about before, about really looking at, like, so when they journal, and what are you passionate about, what's really important to you, and to be able to look against their life, and are they doing anything, because the job that they might do for their career might be something that is totally against their values and passions in life, and no wonder they would feel some kind of misalignment around that. So I think one is really about exploring themselves, about really being true and honest with yourself, as I said before, a lot of the times we look externally for validation. And one of the things that is very, very important is honestly communicating with yourself when you're looking to somebody else for something. What is it you want from them? You know, is it, I want love because I don't feel loved? Well, that's an internal thing, and it doesn't, if you keep, in fact, I think I've just posted today about that kind of never feeling like you're enough. If you keep looking externally for something, they can take that away. And if you're if they're holding your worth in their hands and they walk away, where does that leave you? So it is about building that internal sense of self, and that self-worth, and that validation comes from within. And that can be a really difficult thing if all you've ever known is looking externally for it. So it's very much about finding themselves, and not, one of the other things is not looking to escape. You know, when you were talking before about that kind of the working with children on around emotional intelligence and stuff like that, is a lot of the time the behaviours, the way that children act out, we still do that in our adulthood. We haven't kind of grown up in that way. We still behave like children when we're not getting our needs served. And I think this is one of the biggest things, especially sort of going back to that idea about children, is that there needs to be like a multi-approach to that, because a lot of people just see the way that the reaction is from a child, that kind of behaviour, and not really what's driving it. So there needs to be an understanding from the people around to kind of go, this is why this is happening. It's not just, oh, they're a badly behaved child, you know, it's that actually something led to that behaviour. And I think that's kind of goes back to that honest communication, is we need to be honest with ourselves, is what drives us, what pushes us to feel the way that we do. And if you're honest with yourself, and that can take a lot of strength to kind of look within and say, what I'm missing is actually missing in here, not out here. So for me, that's the kind of place that our work goes with clients, is that really trying to help them develop that sense of self and self-worth and confidence, so that they are being very true to themselves, true in their values, their passions, their purpose in life, and everything that drives them forward.
That's great. I love that you focus on that, because it's definitely such an important part of, you know, how someone develops and grows to learn more about themselves and how they can improve their future. So for my last question, it's what I like to ask all my guests. And if you were to be writing a book, we're going to find out the name of your chapter of your present moment. So within the last year, what would kind of be the chapter title of what you've been experiencing and learning and going through throughout the past year thus far?
That's a really difficult question. I would say this is my life, and that's probably been the biggest thing. So a year ago, I left a very toxic relationship, and mainly, I was going to say mainly because it was a toxic relationship. Honestly, that wasn't really the main part I left. I left because I wanted certain things out of my life, and I wasn't willing to settle. The fact that it took me to the point of leaving that I realised how toxic the relationship was, and probably didn't realise until after I left really how bad things were. So a lot of the last year has been around that recovery, when I said about kind of you still dip, because that other person's voice still gets in your head, and then it brings up things from the past and all of the ways in which, like, you're obviously not good enough. So yeah, this is my life, and I want to live it my way. It is the kind of the way forward, and that's what is driven this whole year. And it has been a year of self-discovery. It is about finding out who I am, what I want, what I'm willing to tolerate in life, and what I'm not willing to. and what I won't live without.
That's awesome. I love that. That was a great response. I'm so happy that you're going through this development, this process, and learning more. It's been such a pleasure speaking with you. I think we talked about a lot of great things that my audience will truly enjoy, and we'll have all of Donna's links towards her social media, towards her work, and you can see more of what she does and speak more with her and reach out. And I really look forward to continuing this connection. It's been such a pleasure having you on the Mental Insights podcast. And I just want to thank you again for coming on here. It truly was a pleasure. And I look forward to continuing our connection and, truly making change within the mental health field.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed it. And
Of
it's
course.
just so nice to be able to kind of talk about what I'm passionate about as well, which is huge.
Yeah, that's what I think it's so fun and it's so exciting to see, two people passionate and just it's a lot of fun to share the conversations, share the knowledge that and it's a good way to do it, to build these connections. And, I think the more that people can talk and, broaden the field, it's a more positive future for what's to come.
Definitely, definitely.
Perfect. Well, I'll let you know when I'll have the podcast up, and I'll let you know when it's posted. I think it'll be in either late next week or the early week in 2 weeks. 'Cause
Right.
I have like two guests scheduled for next week. So I'll let you know and I'll send you the links. Um, and I'll also make sure that I have all of your like social media and website to have linked on. So I'll just make sure that everything that I have is correct, to make sure that everybody can, get in contact with you and follow you, um,
Oh, thank you.
to see more. Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate you
Thank
coming
you.
on
You will
and
notice that my website's under construction though.
under
So
construction.
it'll stay the same